Hello and welcome back to the fourth video in our .NET Core 5 tutorial series. And we are building our cookbook application. And in the last video, we created the ingredients model and we added the migration to the database so that if I find the database, we should have the tables. There we go. Then we have the ingredients table right there. So in this video, we are gonna create our first controller and we're gonna create a view so we can actually view the data we have in our ingredients table. But before we do any of that, let's add some data to our ingredients table. So the way I do that is simply go in here and right click on the table. I press edit the top 200 rows and then it will load up the rows, and we don't have anyone right now, so we'll just create some. Let's name this, just call it meat, and let's name this carrot and a cucumber. There we go. Then we have 3. We don't put anything in for ID because remember we put it in as the key, so that's the primary key. So it's going to auto increment that for us. So we just fill out the name. So great, now we have 3 rows in our database. So we need some sort of a way to display that in our application. And remember, we're using a model view controller application, so we need a controller to, well, control everything. And right here in our controllers folder, we just have a home controller right now. So let's change that and right click the controllers folder and press add a controller. We have a few different options for making a controller, and we're just going to make an empty one right now because we want to make everything from scratch. But you do have the options to get some really nice templates created for you that can really speed up your development process. But we're just going to use the empty one so we can see how everything is going to be made. So then in the bottom, we just have to give it a name, and ingredient controller is a pretty good name because usually your controller is named by the data that it works with, and this is going to work with the ingredients controller because we want this controller to be responsible for viewing the data, the ingredients data, and also adding data to that database. So we're going to name it ingredient controller. I'm going to press OK or enter, and it's going to create this controller for us, the ingredient controller. And right now it just has a single method that's implemented, which is the index method. Now let's quickly recap how routing works. So we've just created our new controller right here. This is our ingredients controller. Our ingredients controller just has a single method. It has the view method implemented. Now a user that wants to view a specific page will get redirected to this view method if they type in our URL and then our controller name, which was just ingredients. And then, for instance, they will type in index. Sorry, I just made a mistake there. It's not called view, it's called index. There we go. Something like that. So if our user here accesses this URL, it's going to go to this controller right here, which is the one we made here, and it's going to go to the method called index, which is right there. So that's how routing works. So now that we have made this ingredients controller, it's for each method that we make, it's going to be a new URL the user can access. So since it right now only has the index method, we can only access the index URL. So if the user types in that part in their address bar, they will essentially go to this method. But this method doesn't have a view yet. So if we open up our views folder, we have a folder called home, which is the views for our home controller. So our home controller has an index and a privacy method that returns this IX and result and a view. So if we open up the home folder, we can see there's an index and a privacy folder in here or a view file. So we need to make the same for our controller. Now you could go in here, right click and add your folder and create the file manually, but Visual Studio just has a really handy feature that you're always going to use. So if you go into your ingredients controller, you can simply right click on your index and you can say add view. Now you get to make what's called a racer view, and you can make an empty one or you can make one with a strongly typed model. We're just going to use the normal racer view, but it doesn't really matter. A racer view is basically it's just a file where you can have HTML and C# code in one file. That's also why it's called a CS_HTML file. So we're going to add this one, and it's going to pop up and ask us stuff about our model, but we're just going to leave everything as it is because this is an index view. So we're just going to press add. I'm just going to let this run the code generation. Okay, there we go. Don't worry if it takes a few seconds, especially the first time. Just let it run its thing, and you will get presented with this file right here. And as you can see in the views folder, it now added our ingredient folder, and inside the ingredient it created the index.cs_HTML file, which we have right here. Now we're just going to remove the top part, but we're going to leave the index here, and we're just going to call it the index ingredient, just so that we know this is the file we are in. So whenever we go to that specific URL, we're going to go into our controller, we're going to go into the index method, and it's going to return the view that has the same controller folder ingredient as our controller name, and then the index file, the index view inside that folder, which is going to be this one. So let's take this for a spin. I'm just going to run this without the debugger run. Great, and here we have the application. I'm going to go up into the URL bar here, and we're just going to write /ingredients/index. Let's hit enter, and there we go. We go into that index ingredients folder that we created, because we said we wanted to go to the ingredients controllers index method, and then we get into that method and it pushes out this view for us. Now the index method is the default method, so if you just write /ingredient and press enter, you're going to go to the same screen, because it's going to default to that screen if you don't specify anything else. Great, so we have a hole through, but the file is not very interesting right now. We want to display some data. We want to display all the ingredients in the table. So first, let's make this a little prettier. We're going to make a container class, and Bootstrap is already included in our project, and it also has code completion for Bootstrap, which is just amazing. Going to make a row, and we're just going to make this fill the entire top. There we go. Whoops. Make it a header and just say ingredients. Then we're going to make a new row, and in this row we're going to make it fill half the screen, and then we want the actual table. We're going to give it a class of table and table hover and table striped, and it's going to have a head and it's going to have a body. Now our ingredients have two properties. If we go into the model, we can see that it has an ID and it has a name. So that's what we want to display in our view file. And we're going to display the ID as well. So the first one is going to be the ID, and the second is going to be the name. And then all that's left is the data, right? So where do we get that? That stuff is done in the controller. So the controller needs to go into the database and get all the ingredients out. Now, all depending on your previous background, you might be used to writing SQL statements to put in, or an entirely different way. But the way we do it in Visual Studio, and this is really the point where you see the magic happening, where all this setup that we've done in the previous videos with the application DB context and all that stuff really makes sense and really rewards us. So first, we need a way to talk to our database. Our application DB context method, or sorry, class, is the one responsible for that. So we're going to include that in our project. And we're just going to call it database. Let's make this a private read-only variable, because we don't want to change this. We just want to read it and work with it. So we need to set this variable to something, because right now it's just, an empty variable. It hasn't been set to anything. So we create a constructor by writing, CTOR and double tap, or you can write it out manually if you prefer. Don't know why you would. So this is the constructor, and the constructor is going to be called automatically whenever the controller is instantiated by the .NET Core framework. So how do we get the application DB context? How do we get, the real one that our application uses? Well, all we have to say is that we want it included in our constructor. We're just going to call it DB, and then we're going to set our own, which we named with an underscore in front so we can distinguish the two. And we're just going to set it equal to that. So ASP.NET is going to do this automatically. It's going to include our application DB context here, and we can set our instance variable to it right there. Amazing. So now we have a way to talk to our database. We want to get a list of ingredients out. So we can make an IEnumerable of type ingredients. We just have to include that folder as well. And let's just call it ingredients. Now the way we can get the ingredients is that we can simply ask the db.ingredients. There we go. It is as simple as that. The database context, or the database manager, is going to go in and find all the ingredients and return them out to us. So all that's left to do is pass the ingredients here into the view, so that the view can access these ingredients. And we just pass it into this view method right there. And then the view file will have access to this particular variable. Amazing. So let's go into the view, and up in the top here, we write the @ symbol. Now, whenever you see the @ symbol in a Razor file, that means this part is C# code. It's not going to be HTML, it's going to be C#. So whatever is following the @ symbol is just plain old C# code. And we can say that we have a model, which is an IEnumerable that has the ingredients class. So what this one of this particular line is saying is that this particular view file that we have right here is representing a model. It has a model attached to it. That's what we're saying right here with the add model keyword. And the model is of type, it's an IEnumerable that contains ingredients. And that's just what we put into the controller here. It's just the same part right here. It's just the data type that we passed in right here. So it's just the data type of the model, this right here, that we attach to the view. Now, why do you do that? Well, it's just so we have an easy way to use the model in our file. Because right now, if you go into the body, we want to enumerate all the ingredients, and we want to just print that out into the table. So again, we write the @ symbol because we say, okay, here be C# code. And we can make a simple for each loop. And we can say, whoops, there we go. You have to write it right next to the @ symbol. If you make a space, it won't work. So you write an @ and then for each. And then we have an ingredient type that we just call ingredients in our model. And you can see it auto-completes model, so it knows what we're talking about. It knows that model is an IEnumerable that has ingredients. So that's why this line works. I don't know if your Visual Studio is doing this, but it always places my curly brackets unaligned like this. So what I do is I press Ctrl-K, Ctrl-D right after each other. That reformats the entire code in your document. And that moves it up. I haven't found a better fix, so if you have anyone, just please let me know in the comments. And then in here, we can simply write HTML again, because C#, when we're just doing one @ symbol, it's just one statement, that C# code, but it knows that these curly brackets are connected to this for each loop up here. So we don't have to do anything else. We just have to write HTML between these brackets, and it's just going to work. We're going to give it some data, and the way we access the data is that we want to get some data from this ingredients variable we are enumerating. So again, we just make the @ symbol, because now we have to write C# code, and we can just say ingredient dot, and you can see here we have the properties. We have the ID and we have the name. So let's get the ID out here, and let's do another one where we get the name out. There we go, and that's it. So let's take this for a spin and see if it works. Oh, I just made a mistake there. I just moved this around. There we go. There, let's take that for a spin. So we're going to go up, write /ingredients, and there we go. We are presented with a table with all of our ingredients, our meat, carrot, and cucumber, with the proper ID attached to it. So everything is working. We now have a way to present the data in our database. Before we conclude the video, let's just add a link so we don't have to go up and type it in manually. So the way we do that is we go into our shared folder and to the layout file, and we can see we have a nav bar right here, and it has a list, and then we have the home and the privacy here. So you can just copy one of these. So we have a new nav item. And the controller here, the ASP controller we want to go to is the ingredient controller. And the action we want to go to is the index. And we're just going to call this ingredients. Save that. Let's take that for a spin. And we can now see we have a link to our ingredients in our navigation bar. And if we press it, we should go to our ingredients table, and there we go. So that concludes it for this video. We have learned how we can go and communicate with our database, how we can get some data out of it. Now we need to implement the rest of the CRUD operations. We need to be able to create ingredients, to edit them, and to delete them. And we're going to look at all those things in the next video. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.